there's an invisible prison that keeps many adults chained to childhood. They walk in grown-up bodies, but their minds are still trapped in that childhood paradise, where comfort feels safe and responsibility seems like a threat. Why do so many people avoid growing up? Why has the transition to maturity become such a heavy burden? The maternal complex is not just a psychological theory. It's a silent force that might be ruining your life without you even realizing it. Carl Jung warned us, those who don't confront this shadow risk spending their entire lives waiting for a rescue that will never come. Do you feel like something is holding you back? If so, this video might be the wake-up call you've been needing. Get ready to understand the maternal complex, the adult struggle against the childhood paradise, and learn how to break free from this cycle before it's too late. Childhood is often seen as a lost paradise, a time of safety, affection, and freedom from responsibility. However, this paradise can turn into an invisible prison when an adult remains unconsciously trapped in it. Carl Jung suggested that the human psyche is wired to evolve, and any attempt to resist this process leads to inner conflict and stagnation. Many adults, without realizing it, live in a state of psychological dependence, trying to recreate the comfort of childhood in their relationships, careers, and life choices. This constant search for a childlike refuge prevents emotional growth and limits their ability to face reality with autonomy. This phenomenon manifests in different ways: chronic procrastination, difficulty committing, and an endless need for external validation. These are people who avoid challenges and responsibilities, staying in an artificial comfort zone. As Jung described, the individual stuck in the past suffers from the spirit of regression, a psychological force that keeps them running in circles, unable to move forward into maturity. This is reflected in the struggles many face when making important decisions or defining a clear life purpose. Without realizing it, they live under the shadow of childhood, always waiting for something or someone to rescue them. The modern world makes it even easier to remain psychologically stuck in childhood. With the rise of technology and entertainment culture, many adults replace the construction of a solid identity with passive consumption of distractions. Social media, video games, pornography, and endless streams of superficial content become escape mechanisms. The problem isn't in using these tools, but in the dependency that reinforces inaction. The longer someone avoids the challenges of real life, the harder it becomes to truly grow up. And the price of this behavior is high: a growing sense of existential emptiness and the feeling of being lost in one's own timeline. From birth, the maternal figure represents protection, warmth, and security. This initial bond is essential for the development of the psyche, but when prolonged beyond necessity, it can become a barrier to maturity. Carl Jung described the maternal complex as a set of unconscious psychological forces that keep an individual trapped in childlike emotional patterns. These patterns can manifest in different ways, such as an extreme inability to make decisions without maternal validation, a constant sense of insecurity in facing the world, or a deep desire to be cared for and protected indefinitely. When an adult fails to break this bond, they carry a mental model into adulthood that inhibits autonomy and growth. The maternal complex can affect both men and women, but its effects tend to be more evident in the male psyche, especially when the father figure is weak or absent. Jung observed that without a strong father to guide a son into independence, the mother may, consciously or unconsciously, keep him in a perpetual state of emotional dependence. This can happen subtly, through overprotection, excessive fear for the child's future, or even emotional manipulation. When the mother dominates the child's psychological development and doesn't allow him to build his own identity, the result is a man unable to detach from childhood and take ownership of his journey in the world. This invisible bond doesn't just delay psychological growth, but also shapes relationships and life choices. Men carrying a strong maternal complex may struggle to build healthy relationships, as they subconsciously seek the same security and care they once received from their mother. They may become overly dependent, insecure, or emotionally unstable, swinging between the need for approval and immature rebellion. To break free from this cycle, one must embark on a conscious process of individuation, as Jung proposed. The journey of becoming a complete and autonomous being, severing inherited patterns, and forging one's own identity. Carl Jung described the Puer Aeternus as an archetype deeply embedded in the psyche of some individuals, preventing them from becoming fully realized adults. While childhood and youth are naturally characterized by curiosity, imagination, and impulsiveness, the problem arises when these traits dominate adult life. The man who refuses to grow up remains trapped in a state of unrealized potential, full of grand ideas but incapable of materializing them. He dreams of great achievements, yet hesitates when faced with difficulties, constantly postponing his responsibilities for an idealized future that never arrives. The Puer Aeternus often has an aversion to structure and long-term commitments. He fears being trapped by a job, a relationship, or any situation that demands discipline and sacrifice. In his mind, freedom is equated with the absence of responsibility, but this perception is an illusion. In reality, he doesn't live in freedom, but in a state of existential paralysis. Unable to commit, he jumps from one opportunity to another, starts projects only to abandon them quickly, idealizes relationships without deepening them, and frequently finds excuses to justify his lack of progress. This psychological pattern can be devastating, as it prevents the development of a solid sense of identity. The lack of commitment breeds insecurity, and the constant pursuit of novelty stops him from building anything meaningful. As Jung observed, the path to individuation requires integrating the shadow, which means recognizing one's own limitations and having the courage to confront them. Maturity demands accepting reality and letting go of the fantasy that life will always be easy and challenge-free. True growth happens when an individual realizes that discipline, effort, and commitment are not enemies of freedom, but rather the pillars that sustain an authentic and fulfilling existence. In ancient civilizations, the transition from childhood to adulthood was marked by specific rituals designed to break a young man's dependency on his family and introduce him to the world as a responsible individual. Jung studied these rites and highlighted their essential role in the human psyche. They symbolize the death of the boy and the birth of the man. Without this clear separation, a young man risks remaining emotionally trapped in the past, never fully assuming his place in society. These rituals were harsh because they needed to be. In many cultures, they involved physical challenges, isolation, and endurance tests that forced young men to confront their own fragility and develop inner strength. In the modern world, these rites have been almost entirely abandoned. Society no longer requires young men to prove their maturity before being recognized as adults. Without a defining moment to symbolize this transition, many remain trapped in extended adolescence, unaware that maturity does not happen automatically with age. The effects of this absence can be seen in the struggles many men face when trying to commit to responsibilities, build stable careers, or form healthy relationships. They remain in a state of waiting, as if they need some external sign to act, but that sign never comes. The collapse of rites of passage is also directly linked to the crisis of the father figure. Jung emphasized that the father plays a crucial role in this process, as he is the guide who introduces a young man to the adult world. When the father is absent or weak, the young man feels lost, lacking a solid reference for what it means to be a mature man. Without guidance, he may cling to distorted models of masculinity, swinging between extreme passivity and forced attempts to prove his strength. Recovering this lost initiation does not mean reviving ancient rituals, but rather creating new challenges that strengthen identity, promote autonomy, and demand courage. When the father figure is absent or emotionally distant, the mother often takes on a central role in her son's life, not only caring for his basic needs, but also becoming his primary emotional reference. Carl Jung described this as a negative aspect of the maternal archetype, where the mother, driven by her protective instinct, unintentionally prevents her son from developing autonomy. This overprotection may not be intentional, but its effects are profound. the young man grows up without learning to handle challenges on his own, developing an extended emotional dependency that can last well into adulthood. This type of relationship creates a psychological paradox. The son, even while desiring independence, feels guilty when trying to distance himself. This happens because the overprotective mother unconsciously reinforces the idea that the world is a dangerous place and that he needs her presence to feel safe. This dynamic can lead to chronic insecurity, causing the individual to avoid making decisions on his own or to constantly seek validation from others. Over time, he becomes an adult incapable of maintaining healthy relationships, as he transfers this dependency to other female figures in his life, whether romantic partners or even female superiors in the workplace. Jung warned that breaking free from this emotional trap is essential for an individual to become a whole and integrated being. This does not mean rejecting or resenting the mother, but rather establishing healthy boundaries and redefining the relationship. The process requires courage, as it involves challenging a deeply ingrained unconscious pattern. However, it is a fundamental step in developing a mature and autonomous identity. By recognizing the influence of this bond and actively working toward emotional independence, an individual can finally begin to forge his own path, free from the invisible chains of maternal overprotection. Overcoming the maternal complex and the Puer Aeternus syndrome is not an instant process. It is a journey that demands effort, awareness, and action. Carl Jung described individuation as the path to becoming a complete and autonomous being, but this requires facing one's own shadows and breaking unconscious patterns of dependency. The first step is recognizing one's own stagnation and admitting that the excessive pursuit of comfort is preventing growth. Without this self-awareness, any attempt at change will be superficial and temporary. The second stage of transformation is replacing passivity with active responsibility. This means making conscious decisions that reinforce independence, taking calculated risks, building disciplined habits, and accepting that adulthood requires sacrifices. For those who grew up in an overprotective environment, taking the first steps toward autonomy can feel overwhelming, but each small achievement strengthens identity and breaks the cycle of dependence. It is essential to step out of the role of a spectator in one's own life and take full control over actions, goals, and choices. Finally, maturity is only solidified when an individual finds a purpose greater than the desire for comfort or external validation. Jung emphasized that without a real sense of purpose, a person becomes vulnerable to regression and existential emptiness. Building something meaningful, whether a career, a family, or a personal legacy, is the key to transcending psychological childhood and fully stepping into adulthood. True freedom does not lie in the absence of responsibility, but in the ability to face it with courage and purpose. By now, you've realized that the struggle against the childhood paradise is real, and many people go their entire lives without noticing they're trapped in it. But now that you understand this mechanism, the real question is, what will you do with this knowledge? Do you feel like you've already started your journey to maturity, or is something still holding you back in the past? Share your thoughts in the comments. I'd love to hear your experience. If this video gave you a new insight, leave a like. This helps YouTube recognize that this content is valuable and allows it to reach more people who need to hear this message. And if you want to keep growing on this journey of self-discovery and transformation, subscribe to the channel and turn on notifications so you don't miss the next videos. We always bring deep reflections for those seeking real growth. And finally, share this video with someone who needs that push to break free from stagnation. Because the truth is, no one is coming to save you. It's up to you to break the cycle. See you in the next video.